Joining us, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, former president of the National Organization for Women and former executive director of the National Employment Lawyers Association, Terry O'Neill, chief strategist for the Bush-Cheney 2004 presidential campaign, and senior MSNBC political contributor Matthew Dowd, and law professor at University of California, Davis, Mary Ziegler. She is the author of Personhood, the New Civil War over Reproduction. Lisa, I will start with you. Will you just set the scene for us with this dismissal, this arguing for a dismissal?
So, Katie, folks will remember that last year the Supreme Court had this case before it, but a different iteration of this case. It was brought originally by a group of doctors that formed an organization specifically to bring this suit in front of a favorable judge, Matthew Kacsmaryk in Amarillo, Texas. But even though he initially enjoined the FDA's approval of mifepristone, which would have taken it off the shelf, the Supreme Court did something surprising, and they said that the doctors who brought the suit never had standing or a requisite injury to sue in the first place. And that should have gotten rid of the case, but for the fact that 3 states, Missouri, Indiana, and Kansas, if I'm wrong, Mary will correct me.
Missouri, Idaho, and Kansas.
I had the I. Basically moved to take over the case in their own names. And now, since January, first the Biden administration, 4 days before then President Biden left office, and now the Trump administration making the same argument. They can't just take over the case and have it exist in Texas because they don't have what's called venue there. It's not an appropriate place for them to litigate. There's nothing that they have as those states that would justify them litigating in Texas. They also say the states don't have standing of their own because they haven't been economically harmed, and there's no proof that the FDA's regulation is interfering with their existing state laws. So again, the Trump administration trying to get rid of this suit. But I do think it's not just a what, but a how, meaning they may not want to get rid of mifepristones being on the market through the courts if they can do it in another, more palatable way, particularly if they can use the FDA to gather a body of scientific evidence. And I will say pro-abortion advocates say there is no scientific evidence that mifepristone hurts people, but they may decide to do it more slowly through the FDA rather than resort to the courts where they know a decision like this would be hugely unpopular.
Mary, I referenced your argument about how this is just buying time for them. Is it your belief that they're buying time to do what Lisa's laying out, to find an argument against an FDA approval of mifepristone?
Yeah, I don't know if President Trump has actually decided what to do about mifepristone, but I do know that he doesn't want the decision to be made by Matthew Kacsmaryk right now. We've seen, as far as abortion is concerned, that Trump wants to control the timeline and the substance of what happens, and this lawsuit is pushing the Trump administration to say and do things it may not want to do in an inopportune moment right before the midterms. One of the things that's really striking about this filing is the Trump administration says absolutely nothing about the substance of what should happen to mifepristone, does not dispute any of the plaintiff's arguments on the merits. So the administration is very much leaving the door open to agreeing with those arguments on the merits if and when Trump feels is the right time. We just can be confident that he doesn't think that time is now.
So, Terry, they're asking the court to dismiss this case. They don't have the power to dismiss it themselves. It's in front of Judge Kacsmaryk in Amarillo, Texas, and he has been notoriously favorable toward anti-abortion lawsuits. Do you foresee a chance that he could say, no, I'm going to let this case continue?
Who knows what Judge Kacsmaryk might do? He has a history of being viciously hostile to the lives and the health and the well-being of women. And he sweeps in, of course, transgender individuals and non-binary individuals with his hostility to women's access to reproductive health care. I live in Tennessee, a state with one of the strictest abortion bans. The hostility here is so awful. The state is even refusing to publish information about the impact of the strict abortion ban here that has been on women. What we know generally is that every abortion ban, every law against abortion inevitably kills women. That is, it increases the rate of preventable death of pregnant people due to complications of pregnancy and childbirth. right? So when President Trump plays politics with women's reproductive health and with their lives, I'm not impressed by his playing politics in this particular case. I think we have to understand that, like the vast majority of Republican politicians who are active today, and I'm not saying that as a partisan matter, I'm saying it as fact. The vast majority of Republican politicians are so viciously hostile to women that they are promoting policies that kill women. It's a scandal, really.
And just to underscore how surprising it would be if this was a wholesale about-face from the Trump administration to suddenly be okay with this, I just want to put up on the screen how Donald Trump has so far reshaped reproductive health care since he's been back in office. His administration dropped a Biden-era lawsuit seeking to protect access to emergency abortions. This was the EMTALA case. It is still ongoing, though, because another party is continuing it. They froze Title X funding for 16 organizations, mass layoffs at HHS, restructuring agencies, and targeting cuts to reproductive and HIV services. They pardoned anti-abortion protesters convicted of violating the FACE Act. These are folks that are, blocking access to abortion clinics. They've reinstated the global gag rule, restricting foreign assistance for abortion services. So the actions of this administration don't fall in line, Terry, with the actions of this requested dismissal, if you believe it's because this administration doesn't want to pursue this.
No, they're just playing politics. I mean, certainly the Trump administration may decide we don't want to do this now. This will hurt us in the midterm elections. That's playing politics with women's lives. Just pass laws that protect women's access to reproductive health care. And you cannot ban abortion without blocking women from an entire range of essential reproductive health care. It can't be done. We have shown for decades that when you think that you are banning just one procedure, just abortion procedures, it turns out that huge numbers of women get blocked from an entire range of reproductive health care. So all I see right now is Donald Trump, like a true Republican, is simply playing politics with when he's going to attack mifepristone, not whether.
Let me talk about the politics angle with you, Matthew, and I'm going to put up on the screen some mifepristone polling. This is from Fox News. 68% of people support legal access to the abortion pill. 59% of them say legal in all or most cases that abortion should be. And only 32% say it should be illegal most of the time. So the country is still very pro-abortion access. Could this be a situation where this administration wants to tackle this, if they still do, after the midterms?
Well, I think there is actually some acknowledgement, and I won't disagree at all on the substance of the issue that was previously discussed, some acknowledgement of the power of this issue in America today, as evidenced by those polls. I mean, this is not a 51% issue, like many times people seem to want to talk about this issue. And the Supreme Court said in their ruling that it was an issue that was hotly debated and there was conflicts on it. This is an overwhelmingly, supported issue in the American public's mind. And I think the Republicans recognize that their substance on this issue is way off where the American public is. And I'll just take a short walk down memory lane in the course of this, is if you look at the aftermath of what the last Supreme Court decision on abortion is and what happened in the elections after that, Republicans took a serious beating in that. And it's not an accident that over 100 years ago, two issues aligned simultaneously. In the 1920s and the 19-teens, two issues aligned. One was women's right to vote, and two was access to reproductive freedom in this. Those things aligned together. And we are seeing 100 years later, that this is about whether or not women have agency and their own responsibility over their decisions in their life. And that's where we are today. It's the same debate that we had 100 years ago, that women and men stood up and said, one, they get the right to vote, and two, that they get access to reproductive freedom in this. And I think that's what there is a recognition, I think, by Trump, maybe, and the Republicans, I think, assuredly, that this issue is a huge, huge net loser for them.
When abortion has been on the ballot directly, it has largely succeeded. The population has said we want to protect the rights to abortion. But Matthew, you're coming to us from a state where not only does Texas have one of the strictest abortion laws, but there's a law that criminalizes it to an extent that if you are seen as helping somebody get an abortion, you could go to prison as well. Has the abortion issue affected elections in Texas? Indirectly, do you foresee it to be a potent issue in any upcoming elections, a Senate election?
Well, I think it's going to be a potent issue in those elections that we're about to face in November in the governor's races in places like Virginia and New Jersey, where women are running and on the ballot for governor. I think you'll see it manifest itself in the course of that. It always manifests itself in the aftermath of a big decision, which it did in the previous Supreme Court decision in this. And I was going to say, when your guest said that Tennessee, I'll see her Tennessee and raise her
raise you in Texas.
Raise you in Texas in the course of this. I mean, I think it's one of many issues. It's not the only issue that people care about. I think a combination of these issues, which motivates people in the course of this. And as I say, not only does it motivate women, it motivates many men who also believe in the right of women to have access to freedom. So I think you'll see it play out in 2025. And a big question will remain is, will there be a decision in 2026 that lays it again in front of the American people in a profound way? And then I think it'll have an effect in congressional and Senate races.